The following is a conversation with Cooper Galvin, the founder of Endless Health, a startup that offers full-loop health support for cardiac and metabolic health. Cooper has a PhD in Biophysics from Stanford Medical School and Master's in Biomedical Engineering from Stanford Engineering School, and was previously the founder of Future Advancers of Science and Technology, an organization connecting STEAM professionals with high school students to tackle big problems and create amazing projects. And also a consultant at McKinsey, which I just found out about, so we could dive into that. But before we talk about the startup and your consulting background and PhD, I would love to learn about your background because you said it's relevant. So tell me about it.
Sure. So I grew up in Alaska, Anchorage and Juneau. It's a fantastic place and unique place in America to grow up in that you experience the freedom that America can offer and the access to untouched nature, wild nature. In Alaska, there's severe public health problems that were obvious to me from my high school and even at a younger age. I was always sort of a hospital nerd growing up. Like I would volunteer at nights on the weekends in the emergency department at my local hospital, and I just loved it there. Like,
were your parents doctors or
no,
what?
I had nobody in my family that was in that. But I think I saw, like even when I was a kid, I would wear the scrubs on Halloween. I was either a wizard or a doctor every Halloween, and I just loved learning about the human body and biology and being there where it's being applied in the hospital. And the doctors took a liking to me, and they would let me scrub in on brain surgeries or on heart surgeries, and even let me hand them things. Cooper, go run to the supply closet, grab this and this tool, and because I would help stock it. And just loved being a part of the team and the medical establishment. And on the flip side, I really, Alaska winters were hard on me and a lot of people in my family. And so I always dreamed of living in California. That was always my dream from like being, from the time I was 8 years old. I wanted to live in California right next to Disneyland, like any 8-year-old. And I achieved that dream. Went to college at Pomona College, which is in LA, and thought that I would be in California for good. At some point in my undergrad years, I had an existential crisis and wanted to like apply what I was learning about science and biology, and took some time off from school, and I moved to Peru. And it's sort of like the crisis that Holden Caulfield goes through in Catcher in the Rye, where he wants to just be somebody doing something that's purely good, like standing there at the end of the field while babies are running through it and help them to avoid running off the cliff. I wanted to do something that was like indisputably good. So I saved money from my research summers and moved to Peru and worked on tuberculosis and infectious disease research there with a lab there that was pivotal in helping prevent the spread of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And learned a lot from the characters of the people that were there, these real heroes of public health, and developed a lifelong passion for biomedical research and applied sciences. And a lot of the lessons that I carry with me to this day came from that experience of being there. I will always be indebted to them for that, for letting me, this teenager, go down and get to act like a PI and run my own studies. So that was an amazing experience that convinced me to do a PhD.
So you were a teenager when you were in Peru?
Yeah, I think I was 20 or 21 when I was there.
That's not a teenager. Okay.
Very young adult.
Okay.
And they, I don't remember exactly how old I was. Maybe I was 19. But they trusted me with running a research study and having my own budget and conducting research that got published in a medical journal. And that totally changed my life. So I then went on to a PhD at Stanford, and at Stanford, I started this organization called FAST, which does that same sort of experience that I got to have in Peru, but for low-income high school students in America, where we give them a small budget and a mentor, and we let them tackle some open question in science and technology. And that proved to be a highly effective program for getting high schoolers to graduate and also to go on and pursue STEM professions. And so now that program's been running for over 7 years. And so we have high schoolers that then went on to do PhDs at prestigious universities. Mm-hmm. Many of them went to UC schools and now have become FAST mentors themselves. And so that's been really awesome to see, and it was rewarding. And so in building that organization, I thought that maybe this is where I belong, like being an organization builder. And so I went on to work at McKinsey.
Sorry, just in terms of FAST, so is it high school students working in labs and helping the PhDs? Or what's the mentorship about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we took a very different tact to that standard kind of science outreach, where instead of making it about the students being helpers on somebody else's project, we let them be a PI of sorts. And the PhD student is actually there to help them on achieving their project. And they work together to come up with a project that they're both interested in. And then it's really rooted in that student's curiosities. And some of those projects they do in labs at Stanford. Many of them they do in the high schools themselves. Mm-hmm. They're all over in the South Bay area. And the students come in on the weekends and work in the high schools. And we had to get all sorts of approval to let that happen.
Yeah, but I can imagine.
We had students building particle accelerators in their high school, or doing advanced microbiology there, scrapping together tools that we could find and using donated parts. And it's really amazing what the mentors are able to do with their students.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I'm sure this really helps them understand what biophysics is about, right? Yeah. And helps them decide what they want to study in undergrad and then postgrad. Yeah,
exactly. And we've expanded from, at first it was a lot of biophysics and plant PhD students. And so the projects tended to have some sort of biophysics or planty thing going on. And then over time, we have social sciences PhDs there, math PhDs there, computer sciences. And we're starting to get some design folks in there to help students do all sorts of crazy projects. So, for example, I had students who they were using these early ECG helmets to map the electrical currents going across my brain.
Wow.
And then would run this very controlled experiment where they would show me, they wanted to invent something that they could use on their grandma who's now unable to communicate, to tell when she needed help. And so they wanted to figure out, what does the brain signal look like when you're distressed or you need help? And so, of course, they put this thing on me and then would make me distressed. So they had these controlled experiments where they would, it was this YouTube video where the camera would slowly zoom in on an object, and then you would realize that it's like a bunch of spiders crawling around. And you could see the moment in my brain scan where my brain realized that they're spiders and starts freaking out. Mm-hmm. And then they had all these other, that's just an example of the kind of creepy movies that they would show, and then map what the brain signals would look like. And then they went on to win their science fair, and then they disappeared along with the ECG. This was the first group of students that I had that disappeared with the instrument that we had. I think they may have actually gone and brought it to their grandma. I have no idea.
Really? So they stole it?
Yeah, they stole it. Yeah.
Well, you should do better selection next time.
Well, it was an impressive project, so there's no hard feelings.
Okay. So how many students go through it per year?
A few hundred. And they're at 2 or 3 high schools in the Bay Area.
That's a lot of students. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's a big endeavor, and it's entirely run by volunteers. So that is really incredible, the amount of work that people put in to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. What's the acceptance rate?
So all of the students that complete the program graduate college or graduate.
But can anyone go through
school.
your program, or do you have to apply?
Yeah, anybody can do it at these schools.
At these schools.
They just have to consistently show up. And so, you could imagine at some high schools this could be very popular because students would see it as a route to college. But at this school, the schools that we work at, only 25% or so go to any college. Okay. And so that's not the incentive. We have to pitch it to them as you get to do this really cool science. Yeah. And you'll have somebody who's going to support you. And maybe you don't have somebody like that in your life, but we'll be there for you throughout as long as you show up. There's no grade. There's no tests. Like, it's just come and do science.
That's awesome.
It's really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the times these kids just don't have the curiosity, right? Don't want to do this. And
yeah, so we're fostering that curiosity that sort of comes from my essentialist view of humans, that I think that we're born with some amount of curiosity and it gets squashed throughout our lives.
I agree, through standardized education. So are you still leading this program, or have you left? Because then you said you went to work for McKinsey.
Yeah. So the program at Stanford is now on its 3rd or 4th generation of leaders. Yeah. I run the nonprofit that coordinates between that program and other programs that are popping up, and help with the fundraising and coordinating of methods between those programs. So that's the role of the nonprofit. So if anybody listening wants to start a program like this, we can support you in that.
That's amazing. I'll put your details in the description so that people can get in touch. So tell me about your experience at McKinsey and what led you to go there, because it's an interesting path that not a lot of people in sciences take.
Yeah. So at Stanford, you would think that everybody who graduates either goes on to academia or works at one of these prestigious consulting groups, because if you look at the recruiting and biosciences especially, like the people that actually want to recruit biosciences, a lot of them are these consulting firms. They show up, give us lunches, things like that. Right. And so honestly, a lot of it was a lack of exposure to other options. Okay. It was, in my mind, it was like you drop out and you do a startup, or you graduate and you go to McKinsey or BCG, or you go on and continue in academia. And I'd had a lot of fun building the FAST organization. And I thought that building organizations was my thing, like helping to make them sustainable and knowing how to do things at massive scale was something that I could learn at McKinsey. What you realize actually being inside McKinsey is totally different than their external branding. McKinsey is a very interesting company in that across the world, it's held up with a relatively high amount of prestige, despite the internal organization of McKinsey being like a law firm, but with even greater emphasis on anarchy. So McKinsey is fundamentally anarchic structure. While I was there, they were trying to rein it in because McKinsey had a lot of bad press. But the way the projects work is some partner goes out and finds somebody that trusts them at a big organization. They pitch some project to them, and then they put it in McKinsey's system for recruiting a team. And a lot of times, projects that have some deeply unethical component to them will fail to recruit a team. And that's one check that McKinsey has for avoiding doing evil stuff. Sometimes they can recruit a team for it. And there were few checks on this sort of thing. I was amazed that I could turn down a lot of projects while I was there. That was something interesting about it on the inside.
What type of projects were you assigned to or offered?
So I was assigned all sorts of things, like help a firm to decide on the kind of granite to put into countertops for this big development firm around the country. Things from that to like help somebody to calculate how much of a very important drug to make to satisfy the needs of the population. And so I was offered all sorts of things like that. And it was interesting, the amount of exposure that we got at the highest levels of organizations to these big impactful problems. But also it was frustrating for a number of reasons. One was that I felt like I never had enough time or enough sleep to do a good job. The second was that the amount of control that I had over the actual handoff was low as a consultant. And then the third was after you do the handoff, whether they listen to it or not is also very limited. And there's always a lot of conflicting interests from just giving the right answer, which I was used to doing as a PhD. So as a PhD, there's really no restrictions on your ability to just look for the truth.
I think the restriction is the funding, where the funding comes from.
Yes, but you can always get some amount of funding, and then you can just you can still just go for the truth. And
well, the funding determines what you're going to research, what you can research.
Yes.
And oftentimes the research you want to do is not the research that gets the funding.
Totally. The money can determine the questions that you can ask. I think that's a big part. The control that you have is largely over how you ask those questions and how you interpret the results and then report them to the world. You do have an immense amount of control over that, compared to when you're working in a service firm where you're hired by usually a VP to give them the answer that will make them look good to the boss. And that's a totally different experience than what I was used to as a PhD. And so it wasn't for me. I quickly realized that. I probably realized that during the first month, and then was looking for what to do next. And during those early days at McKinsey, I also met my life partner, who has totally changed my career trajectory, and I've changed hers. And so I can tell you about her. She's also the co-founder of Endless Health, and talk about how that changed both of our lives. So I met Jiabao during the early times of the pandemic, and we were both living in San Francisco. And at that time, people in San Francisco were taking the pandemic so seriously. Like people weren't seeing their friends. Like everybody was really, really serious about it. And the city was also saying that it would arrest people for meeting up with strangers, that sort of thing. And so we were taking it quite seriously. And we'd met online. We decided to go for a hike together. And on that hike, what was planned to be like a 1 or 2 hour hike ended up being a 5 or 6 hour hike. And we decided that we would be a bubble together, and that we would like go through the next stages of this pandemic together. And since then, we've been quite inseparable. Jiabao is a world famous product designer and artist. I probably should do it in the reverse order, in that she really thinks of herself as an artist. She hails from northern China, which has some similarities to Alaska in its sort of appreciation for sarcasm, which is uncommon in China. A brutal honesty, extremely brutal winters, and it's industrial hotbed of China. What's different is that she told me that she comes from a small city in China, but it's 2 times the size of New York City, and it's very different in those ways. She studied electrical engineering because she's brilliant, but was always drawn to art, and saved up money during her first job as a product designer in Singapore. She went to school there to go to Harvard for design school. And this was probably very much against her family's will. And went to Harvard and was just became alive as she was exposed to high art, high design. The ability for her to shape our culture is really what she's drawn to. And she designed some works during her senior year about the way that technology alters the way that we perceive reality. At that time, this was very contemporary thinking. It challenged surveillance capitalism, and at a time when those conversations were still very early, by inventing these devices that would make them the way that these technologies alter our perception super obvious. So she made this helmet that when you look at the color red expands and grows the same way that we become allergic to certain colors or ideas on social media. And she made these other devices that as you looked at ads, it would add up the amount of money that the platform is making, called commoditized vision. She made another that was called tactile vision, where the perception of light through this little antenna would give you pressure on your head, and so you can navigate through this sort of anglerfish-like antenna, about the way that we get this tunnel vision and restricted access to information. And she that work ended up being very popular. She gave a TED Talk about it, and I remember when I connected with her online, I saw that she had given a TED Talk, and I was really intimidated to meet this girl.
So you messaged her as a result of seeing the TED Talk?
No, I almost didn't message her because I was worried that Harvard TED Talk, this person's going to be very stuck up.
Okay, you were intimidated by her.
Super intimidated, or just prejudiced in some way against it. But then meeting her, Jiabao is one of the most humble and kind people that you'll ever meet. And we immediately hit it off. She was deeply curious about my science and my perspectives. And ever since then, we've collaborated a lot on art and on science. We moved to Alaska together after 2 months and immediately started doing a bunch of art projects together. And being together caused both of us to question the corporate roles that we were in. She was in her 3rd or 4th year at Apple as a product designer. I was a consultant at McKinsey, and we just loved our weekends together and the freedom and exploration. And so we ended up leaving, and with the intention of starting some company together. And
so you did 2 years later.
Yeah, it took time, but we did end up starting something.
So how did you go from product design, art, to heart health?
Yeah. While I was at McKinsey, the final study that I worked on was for a very famous philanthropist to look at what new technologies that are coming out and being pushed because of the pandemic would fundamentally reshape cost structures in the United States. And that made me interested in a few things. One was remote healthcare, the shifting of responsibilities down the value chain of in health, where the profit pools actually stand in healthcare. So the big profit pools are on the pharmaceutical side and on the provider side. And and this is obvious to anybody who ends up going to the emergency room or something, that the bill is just totally out of proportion to what you would anticipate it should be, in reality.
Even if you have insurance, it's even higher sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And then the new technologies that were coming out were like near home testing or at home testing, the ability to use AI to track people's health long term and then make correlations that aren't immediately obvious to them. And on that study, we were supposed to be finding ventures for this famous philanthropist to put money into. And I was disappointed at how few options there were.
That's a great work to do. Having the capital and finding projects to give capital to.
And so I realized that there was a huge gap, and that was the last study for me because I wanted to go work on that gap.
So you were like, why don't I keep the money and start a company that actually fixes the issue?
Yeah, why don't now that we've identified that there's this huge hole, why not keep this guy's contact information in my back pocket, and then come back after we've developed something ourselves. So I left McKinsey confident that we could come up with something new and important in that space. But I also needed to do a job, and I found a job hunting squid in Hawaii next. So I would hunt squid all night.
Why did you need a job?
You
had money from this guy?
I didn't actually have... Oh, no. I didn't have any money from this guy.
Okay.
Like, my job at McKinsey was to help him find companies to spend that money on. Yeah, and I didn't actually produce a lot of savings while I was at McKinsey. So I was working as a squid hunter in Hawaii, and then in the day I would try to genetically modify them. As a postdoc role, there was like an opening at the University of Hawaii, and so I was working on that while Jiabao and I were cooking up an idea, which was around, in the early days of NFTs, we wanted to do a art platform. So you'd prompted me to try to tell you stories of failures, and this was just an absolute failure. We just absolutely screwed it up.
Why? Was it because NFTs failed?
No, we were like totally at the right time on the wave. It was an operational issue. Like, we didn't run the company properly. We put our own money in, hired a bunch of developers in China because Jiabao is comfortable speaking in Chinese and working via WeChat with people who are up at those hours. And that was just a huge mistake. The level of professionalism within the Chinese outsourcing community for software was really, really poor. We just got totally screwed. We built this platform, had a bunch of like top tier artists put their art on it, and then the developers got into a dispute with Jiabao, locked us out, stole a bunch of information, and totally screwed us. And we learned a lot from that about how to outsource properly, how to set timelines properly and milestones, when to spend money, when you need to spend money and when not. And it was, we definitely went out in a blaze of glory in that we got to do some awesome art shows, virtual art shows on our really cool platform with these top tier artists. Didn't make any money off of it, and then totally lost it all.
So what's the lesson learned? Like for the audience, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so when working with outsourced software developers, there's two ways to do it, right? One is to pay people by the hour and do regular handoffs, and that has its advantages because the person is with you for an undetermined amount of time to work on this project, and as long as they're making good progress, they feel like they're going to have to deal with the code again next week, and so they have an incentive to keep building it right and to keep handling it and to keep delivering the objectives that you set. Another way is a fixed project, and for that you have to be really, 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 really clear on what your objectives are, and you have to have handoffs of the source code as you go. You need to make sure that you have somebody on your side double checking the level of security of the system, and that your IP is really your IP is really what it comes down to. And then as you go, as long as they're hitting their handoffs and you're not pivoting and changing. I think that was another mistake that we would make, is that we're used to this idea that as a startup you can iterate as you show people things, but when you're on a fixed project, it's very hard to iterate and change things, especially with remote developers, especially if there's a communication issue, and especially if the scope of the project changes beyond what those developers are actually capable of doing, and especially if there's a cultural barrier to them admitting that they aren't able to do it. So yeah, the lesson is just really clearly defining what the milestones are, paying in chunks, and making sure that the source code is handed over and that it's secure.
Or don't outsource at all. Just hire a developer if development is a key part of your product.
Oh yeah, this is assuming that you needed to do outsourced developing, but if you can develop it yourself, that's even better. Yeah.
So you failed the NFT project.
Yeah, totally.
You moved on to Endless Health.
No. Then I taught at the Broad Institute a course, and then Jiabao and I both, and then Jiabao finally quit Apple, and we both got an offer at UT to really do whatever we wanted here. Jiabao has a position in the School of Technology and Creative Design to teach students about product design, and it's a very, very flexible role. And they encourage her to be involved in startups and to start things. And I got a fellowship to do whatever I want in science, especially around assay development, which is what we were really excited to do.
Acid development?
So assays. So that means...
Assays. What is that?
That's like the most common, like your blood work, that's an assay. Anything where you are looking for a molecular signature in a bodily compartment. So when I think of bodily compartments, that's like blood, saliva, pee, stool, menstrual effluent. These are all great bodily compartments. And I was interested in exploring the furthest reaches of bodily compartments, and as was Jiabao, and trying to find new information from our bodies that is not, we're not often privy to, that could be important for our long-term health. And so I initiated 3 projects while I was at UT. One was with Jiabao, which was to look at what is in menstrual blood, and could we use it to diagnose women's health issues. Another was with a professor named Deji Akinwande, who is a world expert on graphene and carbon-based nanotechnologies, to make a device that you could spit on, and then it could detect multiplex, meaning multiple outputs, the presence of viruses in seconds. And then the third project was around doing food sensitivity tests from poop. And so I was just, working with gross stuff every day and loved it. And then every time that Jiabao's period came around, it meant a lot of work to do and a lot of new data. And we were just so excited whenever her period would come, because, and there's some great images of us like, separating the menstrual blood and finding the different components, because it really was still a mystery what is in menstrual blood at the time that we were doing this work. And the technologies around proteomics have gotten a lot better, that we can actually look at the proteins, the molecular components of menstrual blood a lot deeper. And we were doing it over time. So every month we would take it from her and see how things changed. And it was super interesting to see how it changed after she got COVID, for example, the changes in the menstrual blood. And that project, we're still trying to publish it.
So what did you find? What were the findings?
Yeah, we found hundreds of proteins that had never been described in the literature in menstrual blood. Some of them are extremely mysterious proteins, like this vault protein, which is these elaborate spirals on both sides that really forms like this huge vault, and it contains RNA, and people have no idea what it's for. But there's a ton of it in menstrual blood.
But you said you were looking at blood and trying to diagnose women's health issues.
Yeah, so we wanted to figure out if you could use menstrual blood as a tool to start diagnosing women's health issues. And I know that there's a blood bank in New York where they have been collecting menstrual blood from people with endometriosis. And so you could use the methods that we developed on those samples, if we could get them, and compare the difference between healthy people and people with endometriosis and try to find biomarkers for endometriosis. Mm-hmm. So that's a long-term goal. I hope somebody does that, but we've since then found other things that were interesting, and hopefully laid down the breadcrumbs so somebody can do it. I know that there's a startup in Boston who would be great to do that.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I think they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then but this got us really excited about blood diagnostics, and also doing things at home and making it easier and more accessible to reach into your own body and find information that you need in order to predict your long-term health, or in order to diagnose things early. So then those little sensors, these disposable sensors that could detect viruses from spit, that got us super excited. We thought that would be quicker and easier to commercialize. And so Deji, Jiabao, and I started what is now Endless Health, originally called Peregrine Biosense, mm-hmm. under the idea that we would sell these little disposable strips for virus detection from spit. So that was the start of our company, but the mission is now totally different. The vision is now totally different. The mission is still to make people's health data radically more available to them, actionable. And through making it actionable and more available, you can create habit loops or behavior change, which means you can test yourself, get told you're at risk of this disease, or there's this challenge to your health, but you can do these things that are research backed in huge clinical trials, and if you implement these changes into your life, things will get better and you'll be able to see it. So then we help people to track those changes in their behaviors, and you can do that with wearables and things that are already on the market, and then retest themselves and see how those behaviors have led to a change in their underlying biochemistry. So they can believe it for themselves. They can see these changes happening in themselves. And then that reinforces the habit loop, hopefully for the long term, so that for the rest of their life, they're like, oh, I really should change this thing about my diet. And I think that's really the future of health technology, is the combination of those two things. One is the coaching and accountability, and the integration of various data sources in order to help somebody make sense of their own biology and what works for them. And the other is these new sensors that make it possible to detect things at home, and these new policies and technologies that facilitate that as well.
So do you have a device? Do you have a thing where people can do the test, or do people do a test and then they send it to a lab, which gives them the results?
Yep. Yeah. So where we ended up is that this little electronic device that you could put on your bathroom table and you could spit on, that's going to take a long time to get to. It's going to, we did a lot of innovation on the sensor side, and we realized that the amount of money that we would need to get through clinical trials to get it approved in the US, and recently Europe changed their system so that the requirements are way longer. The requirements take way longer from new medical devices. It was going to take us a long time and a lot of money. But we realized that there was low-hanging fruit in this space. They're like the best test for cardiovascular risk. There was no at-home test for that. And so we wanted to offer that as well as others to start, get people involved. And it's so easy to prick your finger, put it on a card, mail it out, that like, and you don't need to do it every day, that our electronic sensor no longer made as much sense, because you only need to do it every 2 to 3 months in order to track these things effectively. And so in the end, despite our fascination and excitement around this, we realized that for this application that we're going after first, we didn't need that super high-tech version. Yeah, so our habit loop is now based on a mail-in test that you can do in the convenience of your own home. Yeah, and so going from the summer where we were trying to pitch this idea of virus detection to a group of people who no longer believed that infectious diseases exist anymore after COVID, to what we're doing now, two big things happened. One was that we realized we could track other things like hormones on these sensors, and nobody was doing that. And so we wanted to test, is hormone tracking something that would be valuable to people? Like if I could track my stress hormones or my sleep hormones, would that be helpful? And then use research-based strategies to optimize those. So that was one thing that we thought about. The other was that we thought about cardiovascular health, because there's so few companies that focus on that space, and even fewer that actually use biomarkers to alert people early and to track progress. And so we were interested in that, but we thought that the barrier would be higher. Turns out it's actually lower. And so we ran the trial using this hormone tracking. We read a lot about it. We talked to so many doctors and experts in that space. I learned, for example, and I think this is maybe the most valuable thing I say on this podcast, that the most effective strategy for optimizing your daily circadian rhythm, or the hormones that cycle every day, come high in the morning, go low at night, is to go for a morning walk every day outside. Whether it's raining or cloudy, go do that, and it'll set the clock.
I think Andrew Huberman is a big proponent of that. He talks about getting exposure to sunlight once you wake up, having your glass of water, going out.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's right.
Like, I totally agree with Andrew on that. And then the, life-changing event happened, where my co-founder and life partner's mom had a heart attack in the fall. And she's young and seemed healthy, but it just happened. And it could have been predicted if we had been testing her for something like Apo B, or for C-reactive protein, or for these markers. We could have gotten a warning and changed things in her life the way we have since then. And she didn't end up getting any major procedure done, but she changed her lifestyle, and now her body has recovered, and she's headed in the right direction through major behavior change and through taking statins as well, right? That's also important. And that impacted both Jiabao and me, both because it just reminded us of how big this issue is of cardiovascular disease. Like, this is the big problem. Like, cardiovascular disease is the major killer of people worldwide. Like,
it is.
In less than every 2 seconds, somebody's dying of cardiovascular disease, and that's just the people that die, right? Nowadays, the majority of people survive, and then it's the most costly chronic disease after that. And so, like, it's a just tremendous problem for our families, for our healthcare systems, and for us individually to be worried about. That we want, and yet it's something that 80% of the cases are predicted to be preventable through behavior change. And so, like, what's that disconnect? Why is the thing that's killing all of us not being prevented if we could prevent 80% of it? That's crazy to me. And so we're trying to do what we can there to give people the information that they need about their current health status, and then what they need to do to get to the lowest risk strata of the population. And all of that science has been worked out over decades. Like we're doing stuff that we knew as a population 20 years ago. It just hasn't been implemented into a system that made sense with people's psychology.
So what are the ways to measure your cardiovascular health these days?
Right. So there's, I'd say, 3 major things that you should do. One is to track the biomarkers that are predictive of long-term risk. So Apo B is the best one for that. The next is...
And that's through blood tests?
And that's through a blood test.
Okay.
The next is blood pressure. And then the last is conditioning tests. And so you can get a sense of your conditioning by going on a half-hour jog and just see how winded you are. That's already a pretty good test. And then your blood pressure is also a very effective metric of your long-term risk. So those are the things that I would recommend anybody do. Like, everybody should do that, whatever age you are, because half of heart attacks happen at people younger than 65, right? That means that, like, that's where the middle of this normal distribution is, and especially for men, it's younger. And so we really should be tracking these things early. And heart disease starts in our teenage years, right? Like, the cardiologist who advises us, she's on the board of the AHA, and she looks at resections of people's veins and arteries who die in car accidents or who need major surgery, and you can already see the plaques there that lead to every kind of heart disease. Like, all of them are linked to this same mechanism, which is the buildup of plaques in our veins and arteries. And Apo B is the best test for the susceptibility to those plaques. It basically tells you whether you have that kind of molecule that is creating those plaques.
So if you're out of range on the Apo B biomarker, what's the likelihood of getting a heart attack if you're young, in your 20s, 30s? Yeah,
so it depends how far out you project. And so every increase of every time that you increase a percentile above what we define as the low amount, you're significantly increasing your likelihood of having a heart attack, especially. And that we have a graph up on our website that explains exactly how that works. But it's also, I would say, an area that, so Apo B is extremely well studied and extremely significant. It's also an area that's really misunderstood. So people think that their cholesterol matters, and that's a misnomer, because LDL, which is another form of lipoprotein like Apo B, is often referred to as cholesterol.
Yeah.
And so people think that their cholesterol measurement is what matters. It's actually your LDL is what people previously used before Apo B, and it's still the standard of practice in healthcare to use LDL. And it's arguably not even a significant predictor if you're getting down to the stratification of like quantiles or even deciles, right? Meaning you can't get really refined risk prediction from LDL like you can with Apo B. Like Apo B, you can say at your age, with this level, we can most accurately and significantly predict that you're at increased risk. So, and the idea there is also that our strata is way off because most people are in a range that is not healthy for Apo B in America.
If I go get a blood test at my GP, is Apo B normally on it, or do I have to request it?
It depends whether you're doing it in Canada or the US or the UK or France.
Yeah.
So every country has their own standard.
Yeah.
In Canada, they'll test you for Apo B. In the US, they won't.
Wow.
And that just depends. And it's crazy. If you look at the discussions of this among the famous cardiologists, they'll say yes, Apo B is a much better predictor, but doctors and people aren't familiar with it. So we recommend sticking with LDL because it's something that people understand. Like, what kind of a pedantic argument is that? That's crazy. It's like, let's stick to the thing that we know is statistically less predictive. Like that, because people's little minds can't handle a change. And even then, we're calling LDL the wrong thing. And you talk to your GP and they don't even, LDL and Apo B, they aren't even the same class of molecule as a cholesterol. It's a lipoprotein, meaning it's like a fatty protein, whereas cholesterol is a small molecule. It's a totally different thing. But the way that they're related is that they form this shell around cholesterol and they shuttle the cholesterol around the body. And so, yeah, I don't really know the etiology of that mistake. But yeah, it's
I think it's not a mistake. It comes down to the incentives of the healthcare industry in the US and
so speaking
their profit
of
from treating heart diseases.
Speaking of incentives, the way that you get the pharmaceutical companies get a new drug approved, it's by that drug's ability to reduce your LDL. So we've set this somewhat arbitrary standard, and then we create these drugs that one of the major endpoints used in the studies is to be able to reduce something that is known now in the literature to be relatively arbitrary. In any case, we still do tests for LDL because it is somewhat predictive, and it's something that people are looking for. But we really want to get people focused on Apo B, and we do that in our app and the way that we communicate with our customers, that their attention should be on this other one.
So you send them a blood test, or you send them to a lab to do a blood test?
No, we send them the blood test. So you get it in the mail, and then you just prick your finger, put it on a piece of paper,
and you
then
send it to a lab.
Piece of paper to the lab, and then the lab runs the test.
So let's say if my Apo B is a bit higher than the normal range,
yes.
What do you recommend to me through the app?
Yeah, so that depends. So that's sort of the fun part of what we're developing, and that's why Jiabao is so good at this. Is that it really depends on you and what your current lifestyle is. It's like, this is one of the things that we teach at FAST. When somebody asks me a science question, when I'm not on a podcast, the first thing that I do is I ask, okay, well, how far are you in answering that question? And let me see if I can get you the last bit to answer it as well as I understand it. If I understand it better than you. It could be that you explain it to me and then you just taught me something, and that's great. And so similarly, when it comes to lifestyle change, people may have lifestyles that are already reflective of what the literature suggests they should be doing in certain domains, but then in other domains, there are things that they should be improving. So the major axes that we focus on are diet, exercise. Exercise is the biggest one. Medication adherence if you've been prescribed a medicine. So statins are really effective and important medicines for preventing heart disease. And similarly, like metformin and other medicines are really important for preventing metabolic disease. And so if you've been prescribed these, what we also help with is understanding why you're taking that and helping to make sure that you're taking it in accordance with your schedule. And then social connectedness and stress is another huge factor. And it's something that you can very clearly see in your biomarkers when these things are out of whack. And then the last is sleep. Sleep is the least impactful, but it's still quite impactful and well studied. And so we focus on those 5 axes because they're things that are really, really well studied and characterized in the literature. And within each of those, we figure out where you are right now, and then we give you recommendations that fit with your culture and lifestyle and geography and whatever.
So if I sleep 6 hours per day, is that too little? Would it increase my chances of getting a heart disease?
It seems like you're asking from a personal point of view. Yeah, I think, so this is something that surprises people a lot. And one of our early supporters is Dan Kripke, who's a world famous sleep expert at UCSD, Professor Emeritus. And they did the largest study, or he was part of the largest study that looked at people, like the distribution around different amounts of sleep and their likelihood of getting various diseases, cancer, CVD, and metabolic diseases, and as well as their just likelihood of living longer, or it's like risk ratio of all causes of death is what they look at. And the optimal range is between 7 and 9 hours. If you're getting more than 9 hours, your life expectancy quickly drops off. If you're getting less than 7, it also quickly drops off. It turns out the optimal is actually somewhere around 7.5 to 8. But if you go far beyond 8, that's quite dangerous apparently, as well as below 7.
Really?
Yeah. And there's a small fraction of people who have a gene that makes them able to feel rested and prevents them from various diseases that are associated with poor sleep, but is very rare. Less than 10%.
I think Donald Trump has one.
That gene. Yeah, it could be that Donald Trump has that gene.
I've heard he sleeps about 3 hours per day.
Yeah, but it's super rare. And so in general, we recommend people to be in that 7 to 9 hours range. And the first thing we can do is just help people become aware of how much they're getting. And then the next thing we can do is help to brainstorm with them what they can do to change their schedule to.
Yeah. And it's so easy to measure. You have these rings, you have like watch. It's very easy to measure how much you sleep every night.
Your phone can passively do it if you just put it in the corner of your room. Yeah. They have quite clever algorithms to guess when you're sleeping. Yeah,
based on your movement. How about coffee? If I drink like 2-3 cups per day, is that too much? Is coffee good for you in good amounts?
Yeah, so we researched this for the previous iteration of the company. In general, coffee is good for you, and you should drink it before before noon. So the quality of your sleep goes down the later you drink the coffee. And it's been studied how you get the optimal coffee rush or performance is to typically eat it or drink it in mid-morning. So like an hour and a half to 3 hours after waking is apparently the optimal time to have your caffeine intake. And some people don't handle caffeine well. And it's important to know that about yourself. Some people get super dehydrated. Some people get super anxious. Some people get weird arrhythmias. If you're any of those, then you have a side effect of the drug, which is caffeine. But many people handle it perfectly well. And so, yeah, the optimal caffeine strategy is to have it before noon. And apparently you can have like a lot of cups. This has been well studied in observational studies that it actually is protective against a lot of diseases to have many cups of coffee.
That's good.
Yeah.
How about red meat? We talked before this podcast and you said you don't eat red meat. And I just had a podcast like 2 hours ago with a carnivore dietitian, which said, you know, all you should eat is red meat. So
Right.
tell me about red meat and what you researched and how it increases your likelihood of getting cancer.
So what I can say is as a company at Endless Health, what we're looking for is where has research converged on a some sort of consensus that is empirical around what is dangerous to do for your health versus protective to do for your health. And the research has pretty well converged on large amounts of red meat and processed meats being very dangerous for cardiovascular and metabolic health. And you can see these in huge meta-analyses of where there's a dose-dependent effect of the amount of red meat and processed meats consumed with the increased risks of each of these diseases. And then there's also, of course, mouse studies and other animal studies, like monkeys, that have shown that the molecular basis for increased risk of CVD is because these meats often cause inflammation in our cardiovascular system that is atherosclerogenic, meaning it starts to form those plaques. And so if you start giving mice a bunch of these meats, they'll start to form these plaques. And that's, enough to convince me that not to eat it. And I haven't eaten red meats in over a decade. And so at this point, it's...
And you're feeling pretty healthy.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty healthy. And I also... I can assure you that there's all sorts of interesting foods otherwise. But I also don't believe that everybody should completely cut out any kind of food from their diet. I think that they're similar to like smoking, right? I'm not going to go around telling people like you should never smoke a single cigarette. How dare you? Instead, I think that people should understand the risks associated with the various things that they do, and also the rewards associated with incredibly life-affirming behaviors that are also good for our long-term health. And so, there's incredibly delicious foods that are protective, like high-fiber foods that have all the macronutrients that we need, that taste delicious and are fun to eat. Personally, I love making Vietnamese spring rolls. That's like, I do that at least
Isn't
once a
that
week.
fried?
No. These are
non-fried.
Wrapped with rice paper that you dip in water. It's transparent. It looks really cool. And you can put all of your favorite veggies inside. And then if you make a great dip, like every bite just explodes in your mouth. And then similarly with exercise, right? We're trying to get people up to the number of steps that is shown by research in a dose-dependent manner to be protective against cardiovascular and metabolic disease. And so as you cross 5,000 steps a day, you get to 7,500 steps a day, the reward starts to diminish. And so we're making sure that we get people up to 7,500 steps a day and really incentivizing them and explaining to them how much they're benefiting as they get closer and closer to that cutoff. That is well backed by the research. And we focus on these things that are like relatively indisputable in the research, that rather than things that are fads, things that have been exciting or things that have been things that had been exciting 30 years ago that have been accepted as close to fact now.
What's the effect of long cardio exercise versus strength training or interval training on your heart health? Like, is one better than the other? Would you recommend a mixture of those? Is one bad for you?
Neither is bad for you.
Because I was told by the carnivore dietitian that long cardio is actually bad for you. And that you should do interval training.
There is a worry with extremely long cardiovascular exercise, like running marathons. You should be careful that you're not creating that same sort of inflammation that we're trying to avoid with avoiding the carnivore's diet.
So actually marathon inflames your heart?
It can.
That's good to know.
But for some people, their body handles it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, again, I'm not out there, like, protesting on the sideline of the Kenyan marathon, like, what are you guys doing? Stop!
Yeah.
Like, I think some people, they can run a marathon now and then. They can run an ultra marathon. Like, different bodies can handle these things very well.
It seems like David Goggins is handling it well. He's running like 100 miles per day. And
exactly. And I'm sure that he has a fantastic team on the side that are tracking his biomarkers and making sure that his body is not signaling that things are going wrong, that instead that things are headed in the right direction. Because all of their livelihood and his life depend on it. Yeah. And so when it comes to one versus the other, the suggestion is that you're raising your heart rate a half hour a day, whatever way you want to do it. If you want to do it via strength training, some days I do that. Other days I do high intensity interval training. Other days I do long distance running. I like to switch it up. And what we're doing with our clients is working on what works for them. So trying to find the thing that they enjoy, because that's way more important to, like, have them consistently do it than do the perfect one.
So raising your heart rate is the ultimate goal.
Getting your heart rate, yeah.
Because oftentimes you have yoga, which are more like stretchy exercises.
Also raises your heart rate.
Yeah, true. Not so much, though, as running.
Yeah, it depends what kind of yoga, right? So, like, vinyasa yoga will typically get your heart rate to the level that we're trying to get it to. Hatha yoga as well will often. Like, a yin yoga sequence might not, but yin might be beneficial for you for a lot of other reasons. It might help you reduce your stress tremendously, and that may be really good for your cardiovascular health. I think a yin and yang approach is probably the way to go, where you get some sort of
best of both worlds. Yeah,
some sort of movement, and then I love yoga. I just absolutely love yoga. And our developers are from India, and they keep pushing us to put more yoga stuff on the platform. But just in general, I do love moving my body, and I hope that people find more affirming ways to do exercise, because I think that there's a way for everybody.
So your startup is mainly about, like, aggregating research and information around heart health, and then putting it in your app in a way that consumers understand and can act upon.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd say part of it is aggregating the research. Another part is giving people the so there's many kinds of information that are available around heart health.
Yeah.
And for you personally, I would say there's probably 3 sources of information that are really important. One is, what is the current status of your heart health? The next is, what is the current status of your behaviors that would be protective of your heart health? And then the third is, what is the research that informs that where your heart health should be? Like, I'm pitching Apo B right now as the best one that's provided by the literature right now, but it could be in 3 years we find something else. And I'm not going to be like, because I said it on that podcast that one time, like Apo B is the one that it has to be. I'm totally open to the next one that is well supported by the literature. And so we as a company need to be flexible to those things and argue within ourselves and have a good team of experts that are also flexible to look at whatever is best supported by the research. And then help people to correlate those other two forms of information. So there's whatever your heart health status is now. In 6 months, you can get tested again. And then the data point of what it was earlier still matters because your lifestyle may have changed. Yeah. And we can correlate those changes in your lifestyle with the improvement of your heart health. So
are you working on any IP, any technology to complement what you have right now?
Yeah. So there's, I guess going back to that framework that I mentioned earlier about the big breakthroughs in health technology are going to come through the sensors. So we're working on new sensors and ways to collect the information from our clients. Like, for example, I hate the lancets that are available right now for pricking our fingers.
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of the value chain for getting that lab test result. There's a lot of places where you can make improvement.
True.
Similarly, there's other sources of information that I would like to be able to collect. We should be able to collect blood pressure while somebody is exercising more easily and continuously. And then, so that's on like the sensor side. It's also like ECGs, it's silly that you have to pay $10,000 to have them attach a few leads to your body and then throw them away. Like there's all sorts of ways that you could do that more readily at home as well. And you can use algorithms to read it rather than having a doctor like look at it and be like, see this squiggly wave, like I've seen something like that before. I feel like it should be this other way.
Yeah.
That sort of problem is rife for machine learning taking over, right? And then speaking of machine learning, so then the other side of this is the interpretation and the coaching. And that is where there's huge opportunity for IP development on the software side. We are working on, AI coaching in order to protect people's data, which is hard, while at the same time helping people to interpret that data in reference to the literature that's available. And AI can do that in a much more objective way than any human coach can. It can remember everything about you, and it can give it to you in a way that it finds to be more and more effective over time. And it can also embody your heroes. So like if you want to have advice on your basketball shot, maybe it's more effective to have Barack Obama as your coach or LeBron James or Steve Nash than like that guy on Fiverr who's like available to do it.
Yeah.
And even though he's real, if we could get LeBron James to give us his essence, that could be a lot more effective of a coach. And so we're working on something around that too.
That's awesome. That's a good application of deepfakes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people these days suffer from mental health issues, right? They get panic attacks, anxiety, and that's oftentimes accompanied by symptoms like chest pain. So my question is, how do you know that you have a heart attack versus it's just a panic attack and you have anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Like when do you know when to call 911?
I would say this is not something that I should comment on for people. I think in general, you should seek medical help if you think that you are having a heart attack. We have a lot bigger problem of people not getting help when they have a heart attack than we have of people going to get help when they don't have a heart attack. So especially women, this is a huge problem. The symptoms of heart attack take all sorts of form. It can sometimes appear as back pain. It can sometimes appear as shortness of breath. It can sometimes appear as vision loss or something else. And like you, especially for women where those symptoms are especially diverse, we should be encouraging people to get help if they think that there might be something wrong. And wouldn't it be great to know if you're at risk?
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that we want to make more available, is to help people to understand where they lie on the heart health spectrum.
Yeah. It's so difficult because like I've been having chest pain recently.
Oh no.
And I'm like, well, I also have neck pain. So is this related to my neck pain? You know, whenever I move my neck, I get this like sharp pain. And obviously I don't want to call 911 for that. I don't want to go to the emergency room.
Yep.
So like because it's not like a huge pain and it's not something persistent, I'm sort of reluctant to take action, but it could be. So I feel a lot of people are in the same situation.
Yeah, so I think you're now touching on something deeper and much more problematic about our healthcare system, which is that in Peru, where I lived a decade ago, like I could go get help for $5 to $10 for my chest pain within minutes of having it, compared to here where I know that it's just going to be a battle from the time that I walk into urgent care until months later when my bill is resolved. It's like the system is set up to make it as painful as possible to get help for potentially life-threatening problems.
Yeah.
And that's scary. That's really, really a problem. And then beyond that, like our system then, because people then forestall getting medical care until it's just the worst, we're really good at saving people from the brink. That's like the one good thing about our healthcare system. We're probably the best at these like super risky last stage cancer, heart operations, whatever. Like we're good at that because that's what ends up happening in our healthcare system. Like people rationally put things off until the last possible second. And so, you know, there's a huge need for the kind of service that would test people for these major acute conditions, give people information in the comfort of their own home about whether they're having a heart attack or not, and give them peace of mind that they're not, and that they should instead be getting help for the anxiety or whatever, right? But there's also systemic barriers against that as well, which is that if I want to make an at-home acute heart failure or heart attack sensor, which we'd looked at doing, like that is a really serious device, because it may cause somebody who has a heart attack to not go to the emergency room. Yeah. And then I'm liable for having given you this test for you not going and getting the care that you need. And so the burden of proof is so high there that few people want to take it on. There are some companies trying that. There's a company in Toronto that is working on a spit-based, or maybe it's blood-based sensor for heart failure using proBNP, which is awesome. I think somebody should put that out into the world. It's going to be a long time until we have that sort of thing. And in the meantime, there's others that are making primary care and urgent care more available through telehealth and through other services. I think that's another awesome thing. And everybody should find a way to have access to that sort of service. Like you should proactively try to get that if you can.
100%.
Yeah.
Have you heard of a company called Heartflow? It's a Mountain View, California-based company that provides information on the blood flow through your heart.
Oh, yeah.
And they take a coronary CTA and basically turn it into a 3D image. And you can see like all the arteries, every single part of your heart. And it's completely non-invasive.
Yep.
Right. So it's a good way to get information about your heart health.
Yeah. I think that company was started by a student of one of my professors. And it's a really cool example of the amazing tech coming out of Stanford and of the innovations in fluid dynamics. I just remember her talks on it. They're so beautiful, watching the blood flow through the various portions of the heart. Like, if I could have a screensaver, it would absolutely be those sorts of fluid dynamics simulations. Like, it's just so cool.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of technology will both help people to interpret and intuit what's going on in the heart. It'll also help our algorithms to get better at understanding what's going on and assessing risk. Again, there's like structural problems, but then there's also biochemical problems that happen with the heart. And Apo B is great at detecting those biochemical problems that can. So the four major causes of cardiovascular disease are myocardial, like heart attacks, heart failure, stroke, and clots. And all of those are linked to the formation of plaques that eventually restrict blood flow somewhere or cause artery to burst. And so in the end, the biochemistry ends up being an extremely powerful tool for predicting long-term risk.
So if I've had a blood clot, is my heart going to be affected by it? And the blood clot is gone now?
So it depends. It depends where the blood clot was.
In my lung.
So, it can, pulmonary embolisms can lead to long-term cardiovascular effects. And so it's important to be vigilant about your cardiovascular health from then on. Again, your genetics are not a death sentence. Your previous acute conditions are not a death sentence. We can control a huge amount about our heart health, and we should treat any information that we get about ourselves as an invitation to learn more and to make changes to shape the future of our long-term health.
100%. Yeah. So I want to spend the last 10 minutes or so talking about your startup journey, your launch. Like, have you launched? Do you have customers? You went through Antler, the startup incubator last fall. You pivoted many times. Yeah. So talk about that, talk about the failures, talk about the lessons learned, anything that's helpful for aspiring founders.
Sure. So I think I've so far mapped the first half year of our startup journey, where we spent a lot of time working on IP development of these sensors that ended up not being the focus of our company, and had a major pivot last fall towards being this full loop health support service. And since then, we've had a lot of customer discovery, both understanding the incentives of what causes someone to sign up for this kind of program, and the barriers to that. We ran a trial in the fall around this hormone testing, and we signed up a bunch of people in Austin for hormone testing. We gave personalized research-backed advice to each person, and then we retested, and we were amazed that everybody made progress. And I was actually I did not think it would work that well at all, because it was only a month.
Yeah.
But people really took seriously what we suggested. They liked that we offered references for everything, and they liked that we helped them narrow in on like one habit change to focus on, and then sent them reminders, checked in, and then after the month they saw the progress, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm keeping this for the rest of my life. Like, I'm definitely going to do this thing, because they also felt some change. And so from that, we learned a few things. One was that a live person onboarding was really important for creating accountability. The people that we didn't do that with, they were a lot less responsive.
Yeah.
And some didn't even do the second test. And then the other thing that we learned was that people are willing to pay quite a bit for this sort of thing. But only if it's for optimization, not if it's for health, which was interesting.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's a distinction there, which is like, or not if it's for like a disease type of thing. So there's a huge stigma against being unhealthy, against being old, against being frail, against needing help. Like, in general, none of us want to be the kind of person who is sick. And by getting a test, it gets one step closer to being the kind of person who's sick. And so we're very careful to make our testing and our marketing, when the customer is involved, to be about health.
Yeah.
And to be about improving health, and about this long-term journey that we're all on to try to optimize and improve our health. Of course, we're, in effect, reducing risk, and we're testing for risk. And when I talk to you about it, I'm happy to tell you that we're talking about risk and for diseases, right? But in terms of the product and the way that our product feels and looks, it's about health and about optimizing health and improving. So that was a very important lesson that we learned as well. And that, I think, is a breakthrough in this heart health space, because so much of the way that people talk about our heart and our metabolic health is about just diabetes and heart attacks.
Yeah.
And less about how great it feels to be in condition, to be able to eat stuff and then feel good afterwards, like that sort of thing. Yeah, so then after that trial and then the subsequent heart attack of Jiabao's mom, we had a period of soul searching and product redevelopment, and then really threw ourselves into this. Like, originally Endless Health was a brand that was within Peregrine Biosense to help construct and sell this product. But then we realized that no, Endless Health is the company that we want to build. And Endless Health became the just complete focus. And we committed to heart and metabolic health. And then, but really what we're focused on is just long-term chronic disease prevention and behavior change. And then we want to go down the list of the major exacerbators of our long-term health. So like the big boogeyman is cardiovascular health, but then we'll also hit the related one, which is metabolic health. And then eventually we're going to hit musculoskeletal health. And then after that, we'll hit mental and other neurological health. And so, and then maybe someday then the science will be there and then we can prevent cancer. But that, I think, is going to be a little while. Yeah. And it may not be a behavior change thing, but we want to go for the things that are behavior change and are the major pillars of longevity. And so we then developed this brand and made a prototype and went out to customers throughout the spring, signed up a few people to give us a lot of advice, and realized that there's a lot of interest in the like 30, 40-year-old working population who have either had some family history of heart disease or diabetes, or have had a test that made them a little worried, or some symptom that made them a little worried. And because of that, they were willing to give us a lot of their time and help us to refine the product. And that we took as a signal that people will eventually be willing to pay for this. But in the US, people are not used to paying directly for any kind of health service other than gym membership. And so we think that our long-term go-to-market strategy, after we get some more adoption of our direct-to-consumer, is to be a B2B service to both insurance companies and to employers. Insurance companies are interested in us because we reduce the overall burden of the most expensive cases to them. So there's a cold money argument for what we're doing. And then employers are interested because we have a great brand, and they want their employees to feel protected, and that the company cares about them. And the argument there is pretty simple. It's just we're still working out what the payment model will be with those employers.
So you're currently charging $99 per package?
Yeah. So
how does your pricing
to break
work
it
now?
down, like I'll just tell you what our costs are. Like we to run our tests, our mail-in tests, it costs about $60 to do the whole package. Like to send it out to people, have them have the whole kit, send it to the lab, do the test in the lab, send the results through a physician. Like a physician has to look at them, and that whole thing costs about $60. So we need to charge more than that, or have people sign up for a subscription service. And then if we have coaches, we still have to pay the coaches too, right? So the coaches need some hourly pay as well, unless we start taking the essence of LeBron James, but LeBron James still needs his essence reimbursed. And so that means we have to be more than $60, right? So we have a package that involves coaching and testing for around $100. And then we have packages that are just testing, which are cheaper. And if you sign up on a biannual basis, then it's even cheaper. And when we sell it to employers or to insurance companies, we want the end user to not have to directly pay. And so that we think is best for this sort of prevention program where there's a win-win-win. If the insurance company benefits, ends up saving more money, then they're paying us anyway. Then of course it should be free to the person to sign up for it, because through this convoluted system, the insurance company is already getting their money anyway. So I think that is how we really think this will scale to having the impact that we want to see. We think that adoption will be a lot higher if it's free. I think the other big challenge for us is not as much getting people to pay, because people really want this information. The next big challenge is getting somebody to prick their finger. Yeah. Because it hurts. Like, really? On Saturday, I was there, I was testing all these Lancets. We've ordered 8 of them, right? And so I was sitting there at the dinner table, just pricking my finger, seeing which one feels better, which I'm sure these other testing company CEOs are not doing, because they suck, the ones that they pick. They just pick the cheapest ones. But still there's room for improvement. But I think what we're trying to figure out now is how to make that overall experience of doing your test, sending out the result, as pain-free and rewarding as possible. So we also want to give some people some surprises and good things as they're going through that process. So that's an area where we're refining our product actively.
That's awesome. And have you looked into competition? Is there anyone else doing similar things? How are you thinking about that?
There's a lot of companies right now doing mail-in blood testing for stuff. If you want to get an Apo B test through Inside Tracker, you have to sign up for their $600 a month program. And that's brutal. You could also go to Quest and you could get these tests yourself. The process for signing up for that is highly convoluted. And you have to drive to a Quest, and not everybody's near a Quest. And then then you get this PDF that just makes no sense even to me when I receive it with my result. Like the ability to interpret it and turn it into behavior change is not there.
Yeah.
And so as far as I know, we're the only company that is doing the full loop health support, where we connect with the lab and the physician to do the test. But that's not where it ends, right? Anybody could do that. We then are connecting you with the best research-backed solutions for you personally, getting to know you personally, and then helping you to decide on the behaviors that you're going to do to change in your life, and then track those behaviors easily over time. Track them, and then you retest, and then you can see how your behavior changes correlate with the improvement in your heart health. Yeah.
It's awesome. I mean, it's a very helpful product, and I encourage everyone to sign up. Can you tell us what's the website? How can people purchase your product?
Yeah, it's www.endless.health. And we're excited for individuals to sign up, and we're even more excited if you're an employer and you want to offer this to your employees free of charge.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cooper. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very